The hospital hallway was silent except for the clicking of expensive heels against polished marble. Margaret Williams stood frozen outside the operating room, her manicured hands trembling as she read the nameplate on the door. Dr. Marcus Thompson, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. 28 years had passed since she last saw that face. But she'd never forgotten those eyes. The same dark, intelligent eyes that had looked up at her from a hospital bassinet, reaching tiny fingers toward a mother who turned away. Now that abandoned baby was about to save her husband's life. "Mrs. Williams?" The voice made her heart stop. She turned slowly, and there he was, tall, confident, wearing scrubs that couldn't hide the dignity he carried like armor. "I'm Dr. Thompson. I'll be performing your husband's emergency heart surgery today." Margaret's world tilted. The boy she'd rejected, the child she'd convinced herself was better off without her, was now the only man who could save the person she loved most. How did we get here? How did the baby I abandoned become the doctor, holding my husband's life in his hands? This is a story about choices that echo through generations, about a mother's shame that nearly destroyed 2 lives, and about forgiveness that came when it was needed most. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I know you have countless options for how to spend your time, and I'm honored you chose to be here with me today. If this story touches you the way it touched me, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me bring you more real-life stories that matter, and I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Margaret Williams was 19 when her life changed forever. It was 1994, and she was a sophomore at Northwestern University, studying literature with dreams of becoming a teacher. She came from old money, the kind of Chicago family where appearances mattered more than truth, where reputation was currency, and where love came with conditions. Her parents, Robert and Catherine Williams, owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Midwest. Their brownstone on the Gold Coast was featured in magazines. Margaret wore designer clothes to charity galas, and spent summers at the family estate in Lake Geneva. On paper, her life was perfect. But perfection has a way of cracking under pressure. It started innocently enough. Margaret was tutoring inner-city kids through a university program. That's where she met David Thompson, a brilliant young man from the South Side, who was working 2 jobs to put himself through community college. He was studying to become a teacher too, and when they talked about books and dreams and changing the world, Margaret felt something she'd never experienced in her privileged bubble: genuine connection. David was everything her parents would disapprove of. He was black, he was poor, and he spoke with a passion about social justice that made Margaret question everything she'd been taught about how the world worked. When he looked at her, he didn't see a Williams family princess. He saw Margaret, just Margaret, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Their relationship bloomed in secret. Coffee shops on the wrong side of town, study sessions that turned into long conversations about life, stolen kisses in the university library. Margaret lived for those moments when she could be herself, when she didn't have to perform the role of the perfect daughter. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. Margaret discovered she was pregnant on a Tuesday in October. She was alone in her dorm bathroom, staring at the test, when her world imploded. This wasn't supposed to happen to girls like her. Girls like her had bright futures, safe choices, parents who would handle any problem with money and connections. She told David first. She'll never forget the way his face lit up. Not with fear or panic, but with joy. "We can do this, Margaret," he said, taking her hands. "We can make this work. I love you, and I'll love our baby." But Margaret was already thinking about her parents' faces when they found out about the whispers at the country club, about the family name being dragged through scandal, about being cut off from everything she'd ever known. She made the hardest decision of her young life. She broke up with David without telling him why, claiming she'd realized their relationship had no future. She watched his heart break in real time, saw the confusion and pain in his eyes, but she told herself it was for the best. Then she went home to Chicago and told her parents she was pregnant. The Williams family meeting took place in her father's study, surrounded by leather-bound books and old money traditions. Margaret sat in the same chair where she'd been disciplined as a child, but this conversation would change everything. Her mother spoke first, her voice cold and controlled. "This is what's going to happen. You'll take a semester off for health reasons. We'll send you to our house in Wisconsin until this situation is resolved." "Resolved?" Margaret whispered. Her father leaned forward. You're going to give birth quietly, place the child for adoption, and return to school as if nothing happened. The family reputation remains intact, and you can move forward with your life." Margaret wanted to protest, wanted to tell them about David, about the love she'd felt, about the dreams they'd shared. But sitting in that room, surrounded by portraits of William's ancestors, she felt the weight of expectations crushing her courage. 9 months later, in a private hospital in Lake Geneva, Margaret gave birth to a son. The baby was beautiful. All babies are, but this one took her breath away. He had David's intelligent eyes and her stubborn chin. When the nurse placed him on her chest, something primal and fierce awakened in her heart. This was her child, her blood, her love made manifest. For 3 days, she held him. She named him Marcus in her heart, though she knew he'd never carry that name. She memorized his tiny features, the way he curled his fingers around hers, the soft sounds he made when he slept. On the 4th day, her parents arrived with papers and a social worker. "It's time, Margaret," her mother said softly. "You've done the right thing. Now you can heal and move on." But as they prepared to take Marcus away, Margaret had a moment of pure panic. "Wait," she said, reaching for her baby. I can't do this. He's mine." Her father's voice was gentle but firm. "Margaret, think about what kind of life you could give him. You're 20 years old with no degree, no job, no prospects. The adoptive family can provide things you never could. They can give him opportunities, education, a real future. What if he looks for me someday?" Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He won't," her mother said with certainty that now seems cruel. "These are closed adoptions. Clean breaks are better for everyone." Margaret looked down at Marcus one last time. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his world was about to change forever. She kissed his forehead and whispered words that would haunt her for decades. "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy's not strong enough to fight for you." And then he was gone. The social worker assured her that Marcus was going to a loving black family, a teacher and a nurse who'd been trying to have children for years. They would love him, raise him well, give him everything Margaret couldn't. Margaret returned to Northwestern that fall, but she was fundamentally changed. She threw herself into her studies, graduated summa cum laude, and built a successful career in publishing. She married Richard Williams, a kind, stable man from an appropriate family, and they had 2 daughters together. But she never forgot the son she gave away. Every March 15th, on Marcus's birthday, she would spend the day in quiet mourning, wondering what he looked like, what he was learning, whether he was happy. She never imagined their paths would cross again. 28 years passed in a blur of responsibilities and carefully buried guilt. Margaret became everything her parents had groomed her to be, a pillar of Chicago society, a devoted wife, a loving mother to Emma and Sarah. But there was always a shadow in her perfect life, a child-shaped hole that never quite healed. She thought about Marcus constantly. When Emma took her first steps, Margaret wondered if Marcus had walked early too. When Sarah graduated valedictorian, she pictured another graduation somewhere in the city, another proud moment she'd missed. Every young black man she passed on the street got a second glance, a wondering look, a mother's desperate hope for recognition. Margaret had tried to find him once, when he turned 18. She hired a private investigator, but the sealed adoption records were a fortress she couldn't breach. The Peary told her that Illinois had some of the most restrictive adoption laws in the country. Unless he initiates contact, the investigator explained, there's no legal way to find him. So Margaret waited. She donated anonymously to scholarship funds at inner-city schools, telling herself it was penance. She volunteered at literacy programs, hoping somehow she might cross paths with her son. She lived with the constant ache of wondering. Richard knew about Marcus. Margaret had told him before they married, needing him to understand the grief she carried. He was patient with her quiet depressions, understanding when she needed space on Marcus's birthday, supportive when she talked about her regrets. "You were just a kid yourself," he would remind her. "You did what you thought was best." But Margaret knew better. She hadn't done what was best for Marcus. She'd done what was easiest for herself, what preserved her comfortable life and her family's approval. The shame of that truth ate at her like acid. Their daughters knew they had a half-brother somewhere in the world. Margaret had told them when they were old enough to understand, wanting them to know the truth about choices and consequences. Emma and Sarah had mixed feelings about their mother's decision, but they loved her and supported her quiet grief. "Maybe he'll find us someday," Emma would say hopefully. Maybe he doesn't want to, Sarah would counter. Ever practical, Margaret lived with both possibilities. As the years passed, she began to wonder if Marcus even knew he was adopted. Some families kept that secret. Maybe he'd grown up thinking his adoptive parents were his biological family. Maybe he was happy and whole and had no reason to search for the mother who gave him away. The not knowing was its own special torture. Margaret threw herself into charitable work, serving on boards, organizing fundraisers, trying to balance the cosmic scales somehow. She was particularly drawn to causes that helped children, education initiatives, healthcare access, mentorship programs. It was her way of loving the child she couldn't claim. But life has a way of bringing us face to face with our past when we least expect it. The call came on a Thursday in November. Margaret was in her office at the publishing house, reviewing manuscripts, when her assistant buzzed in with urgency in her voice. "Mrs. Williams, you need to take this call. It's Northwestern Memorial Hospital." Margaret's blood turned to ice. Hospital calls were never good news. "This is Margaret Williams." "Mrs. Williams, this is Dr. Patricia Hayes. I'm calling about your husband. He's been brought to our emergency department with what appears to be a massive heart attack. You need to come immediately." The drive to the hospital was a blur of panic and prayer. Richard was only 52, in good health, a runner who ate salads and took his vitamins. Heart attacks happened to other people, older people, people who didn't have so much left to do. Margaret arrived to find her husband unconscious in the cardiac intensive care unit, surrounded by machines and monitors that beeped with mechanical concern. Dr. Hayes explained the situation with professional compassion. Massive heart attack, significant damage, emergency surgery required. "We have one of the best cardiac surgeons in the Midwest," Dr. Hayes assured her. "Dr. Thompson is a miracle worker. If anyone can save your husband, it's him." Thompson. The name meant nothing to Margaret in that moment of crisis. She was focused entirely on Richard's pale face, on the rhythm of his breathing, on the possibility that she might lose the man who'd loved her through everything. The next few hours were agony. Margaret called her daughters, who rushed to the hospital. She called her parents, now in their 80s but still pillars of strength. She sat in the waiting room and bargained with God, offering everything she had for Richard's life. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Thompson emerged from surgery, still in his scrubs, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Margaret looked up and her world stopped. Those eyes. She knew those eyes. "Mrs. Williams," his voice was professional, controlled, but Margaret heard something else underneath, a tremor of recognition, of shock. "I'm Dr. Thompson." Margaret couldn't speak. 28 years collapsed into a single moment. The baby she'd held for 3 days was standing in front of her. A man now, accomplished and dignified in saving lives. Her son was saving her husband's life. "The surgery went well," Dr. Thompson continued, his voice steady despite whatever turmoil he might be feeling. "We were able to repair the damage and restore blood flow. Mr. Williams is stable, but the next 24 hours will be critical." Margaret nodded numbly, trying to process the impossible coincidence that had brought them together. "Thank you," she whispered. Dr. Thompson studied her face for a long moment. "You should know. I remember you." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. "You remember." "I remember being 3 years old and asking my mom why I looked different from her and Dad. I remember her sitting me down and explaining that I had a birth mother who loved me but couldn't take care of me. I remember her showing me the one photo she had, a young woman holding me in the hospital." His voice remained steady, professional, but Margaret could see the pain in his eyes. "I remember wondering my whole life what I did wrong to make you give me away." Margaret's composure shattered. 28 years of buried grief came pouring out in broken sobs. "Nothing," she choked out. "You did nothing wrong. I did everything wrong." Dr. Thompson, Marcus, looked around the busy hospital corridor, clearly struggling with his own emotions. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "Please," Margaret begged. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please, can we talk? After Richard is stable, after you've done everything you need to do professionally, can we talk?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd shaped his life by her absence, who'd given him the gift of existence and the burden of abandonment. "My mom, my adoptive mom, died 2 years ago. Cancer. Before she passed, she made me promise that if I ever met you, I'd try to understand your side of the story." Margaret felt a stab of grief for this woman she'd never met, who'd raised her son with such wisdom and grace. She sounds like an amazing mother. She was. Marcus's voice softened slightly. She always said that it took tremendous love to let go the way you did. I didn't understand what she meant until I became a father myself. Margaret's heart stopped. You have children, 2 daughters, 6 and 4. A small smile flickered across his face. They're the light of my world. Margaret saw herself in that smile, the fierce protectiveness of a parent's love. I would love to meet them someday. If you'd ever want that. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I need to check on your husband. We'll talk later. As he walked away, Margaret sank into a waiting room chair, overwhelmed by the collision of joy and grief, hope and regret. Her son was alive, successful, a father himself. He'd grown up to be everything she'd dreamed and more. But she'd missed all of it. Every birthday, every milestone, every scraped knee and proud moment. She'd traded away the privilege of being his mother for the comfort of keeping her secrets. And now, in the cruelest twist of fate, she needed him to save the life of the man she'd chosen instead. Richard survived the surgery, but his recovery was slow. Margaret spent the next week practically living at the hospital, dividing her time between her husband's bedside and awkward encounters with the son she'd given away. Marcus was professional during his medical rounds, but Margaret could feel the weight of unspoken questions every time he entered the room. Finally, on a quiet Saturday evening when Richard was sleeping peacefully, Marcus knocked on the door of the family consultation room where Margaret had been keeping vigil. "Do you have time to talk now?" he asked. Margaret nodded, her heart racing. This was the conversation she'd dreamed of and dreaded for 28 years. They sat across from each other at a small table, 2 strangers bound by blood and separated by choices. Marcus looked tired. He'd been working long hours, caring for Richard and his other patients, carrying the emotional weight of this impossible situation. "I want you to know," Margaret began, her voice trembling, "that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Not a single day in 28 years. Marcus listened without expression. "Then why didn't you fight to keep me?" The question Margaret had been dreading. She'd rehearsed answers in her mind for decades, but facing her son, none of them seemed adequate. "I was 19 years old and terrified," she said quietly. "My parents told me I was being selfish if I kept you, that I'd be ruining your chances for a good life. They said a teenage mother with no resources couldn't give you what you deserved. So you chose their approval over your child." The words cut deep, because they were true. "I chose what I thought was security for you over what I wanted for myself. I was wrong about so many things, but I wasn't wrong about loving you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want to know what my childhood was like?" Margaret nodded, bracing herself. "My parents, my real parents, the ones who raised me, were incredible. My mom, Dorothy, was a 3rd-grade teacher. My dad, James, was a nurse. They weren't wealthy, but they were rich in all the ways that mattered. They read to me every night, helped with homework, came to every school play and soccer game. They loved me fiercely and completely from the moment I came into their lives." Margaret felt simultaneous relief and devastating loss.
"I'm so glad. I prayed you'd find parents like that."
"They always told me about you," Marcus continued. "Not with anger or resentment, but with respect. My mom said that giving me up took more strength than keeping me would have. She said you must have loved me tremendously to want better for me than what you could provide." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. She was a wise woman. She was, and she was right about the love part. "I can see it in your eyes, the same love I feel for my own daughters. But she was wrong about one thing." Margaret looked up hopefully. "She told me that if I ever met you, I'd understand your choice completely. But I don't understand." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I don't understand how you could carry me for 9 months, hold me for 3 days, look into my eyes, and then walk away. I don't understand how you could marry someone else, have other children, and never try to find me." Margaret felt the full weight of her son's pain. 28 years of wondering and hurt crystallized into this moment. "You're right. There's no way to make you understand." Because it wasn't understandable. It was cowardice disguised as sacrifice. "I needed you," Marcus said simply. "Not perfect parenting or unlimited resources. I just needed my mother to want me enough to try." Margaret's heart shattered completely. "I did want you. I wanted you so much it felt like dying to let you go. But I was weak, and I let fear make my choices. I let other people convince me that love wasn't enough. Love would have been enough, Marcus said quietly. Love is always enough. They sat in silence for several minutes, both crying quietly, both trying to process decades of pain and loss. Finally, Marcus spoke again. My mom made me promise something else before she died. Margaret looked up. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance to forgive you, I would take it. She said carrying anger was like carrying poison, and that forgiveness was the only antidote. Margaret held her breath. I'm not ready to forgive yet, Marcus said honestly, but I'm willing to try to understand. For my daughter's sake. If nothing else, they deserve to know their grandmother's story, even if it's complicated. Margaret felt a flutter of hope. You'd let me meet them? Maybe someday, if we can figure out how to be family despite everything. I'd like that more than anything in the world. Marcus stood up, exhaustion clear in every line of his body. Your husband is going to be fine, by the way. He's strong, and he's got excellent reasons to fight for his life. Thank you, Margaret whispered, for saving him, for talking to me, for being willing to try. Marcus paused at the door. I need you to know something. I had a good life, a really good life. My parents loved me. I got an excellent education. I became the man I wanted to be. Your choice didn't ruin me. Margaret nodded, tears flowing freely. But it changed me, and it changed you too. We're both different people because of what happened in that hospital room 28 years ago. Do you think we can find our way back to each other? Margaret asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. I think we can find our way forward. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to try. After he left, Margaret sat alone in the consultation room, processing the miracle and tragedy of the last week. She'd found her son, but she'd also confronted the full cost of her choices. There was no going back, no way to undo the years of separation and pain. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Over the next few months, Margaret and Marcus began the delicate process of building a relationship. It wasn't easy. 28 years of separation couldn't be bridged with a few conversations. There were moments of connection and moments of painful honesty, times when old wounds felt fresh and times when hope seemed possible. Margaret learned about Marcus's life in careful fragments. He'd excelled in school, earned a full scholarship to medical school, specialized in cardiac surgery because he wanted to save lives the way his adoptive father had saved lives as a nurse. He'd married his college sweetheart, Rachel, and they'd built a beautiful life together on the south side of Chicago. Marcus learned about Margaret's guilt, her years of wondering, her quiet, charitable work that had been her way of loving him from a distance. He met his half-sisters, Emma and Sarah, who welcomed him with the same grace their mother had shown his adoptive family. But the real breakthrough came 6 months after their reunion, when Marcus's 4-year-old daughter, Lily, was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. Margaret was at home when Marcus called, his voice thick with terror and desperation. She needs surgery, the same kind of surgery I do on adults. But she's so small, so fragile. The pediatric cardiac surgeon is good. But you want to do it yourself, Margaret finished. I can't. It's too personal, too emotional. My hands would shake, but I don't trust anyone else with her life. Margaret's heart broke for her son, for the impossible position of being both father and doctor in this crisis. What can I do? I don't know why I called you, Marcus admitted. We barely know each other, but I needed to talk to someone who would understand what she means to me. Margaret understood then that this was about more than medical advice. This was Marcus reaching out to the one person who would understand a parent's desperate love, even if she'd made mistakes in expressing her own. Tell me about her, Margaret said softly. For the next hour, Marcus talked about Lily, her laugh, her stubbornness, her love of books and princess dresses. He talked about reading to her every night, about the way she fell asleep holding his hand, about how she'd asked if Grandpa James was taking care of Grandma Dorothy in heaven. Margaret listened and fell in love with her granddaughter through her son's words. She's going to be okay, Margaret said finally. Not because I can promise that medically, but because I can promise that she's surrounded by love, and love is stronger than fear. The surgery was successful. Lily recovered beautifully, and through that crisis, something shifted between Margaret and Marcus. Shared worry had bonded them in a way that months of careful conversation hadn't achieved. A few weeks later, Marcus brought both his daughters to meet Margaret officially. 6-year-old Maya was cautious, but curious. 4-year-old Lily, still recovering but irrepressible. climbed immediately into Margaret's lap and asked if she could call her Grandma Maggie. Margaret looked at Marcus, asking permission with her eyes. "If you want to," he said quietly. "I want to," Lily declared, and just like that, Margaret became a grandmother. It wasn't a complete healing. There was still weariness between Margaret and Marcus, still conversations that needed to happen, and forgiveness that needed time to grow, but it was a beginning. That Christmas, for the first time in 28 years, Margaret's family was complete. Richard, recovered and grateful, carved turkey at a table that included all 4 of their children. Emma and Sarah delighted in their new role as aunts. Maya and Lily brought joy and chaos in equal measure. Margaret watched Marcus help Lily with her dinner and saw echoes of the baby she'd held for 3 precious days. But more than that, she saw the man he'd become despite her absence. Strong, compassionate, devoted to his family. After dinner, as the girls played and the adults cleaned up, Marcus found Margaret in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For giving me to parents who knew how to love me, for calling me when Lily was sick, for being patient while I figured out how to have a mother again." Margaret wiped her eyes with a dish towel. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be your mother again, even if it's different now." Marcus smiled. The first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "It's different, but it's still family." 2 years have passed since that life-changing night in the hospital. Margaret's relationship with Marcus continues to evolve, built on honesty rather than the perfect reunion she'd once imagined. They've had difficult conversations about the past, moments of tension, times when old hurts resurface, but they've also had beautiful moments. Margaret was there when Maya lost her first tooth. She taught Lily to bake cookies. She and Marcus have found common ground in their shared love of literature and their fierce protectiveness of family. Richard has made a full recovery and loves his role as step-grandfather to Maya and Lily. Emma and Sarah have embraced their big brother completely, creating new family traditions that include everyone. Most importantly, Margaret has learned to forgive herself, not to excuse the choice she made as a frightened 19-year-old, but to understand that she can't change the past, only honor it by living better in the present. Last month, Margaret and Marcus visited Dorothy Thompson's grave together. Margaret brought flowers and a letter she'd written but never sent, an attempt to thank the woman who'd raised her son with such love and wisdom. "She would have liked you," Marcus said as they stood by the headstone. "I wish I could have thanked her in person. She knew, somehow, she always knew you were grateful." Margaret has started volunteering with an organization that helps birth mothers and adoptive families navigate open adoptions. She can't change her own story, but she can help others write different endings. The work is healing in ways she didn't expect. Every mother she counsels, every family she helps connect, feels like a small redemption. But the real redemption is simpler than that. It's Sunday dinners with all her children. It's bedtime stories read to granddaughters who call her Grandma Maggie without any knowledge of the complicated history behind that relationship. It's the way Marcus signs his Christmas cards, "Love your son," without irony or reservation. The other day, Lily asked Margaret why she looked sad sometimes when she was watching Marcus. "Because I missed a lot of years with your daddy," Margaret explained honestly, "and I'm sad about that." "But you found each other now," Lily said with the simple wisdom of childhood. That's the important part. Margaret realized her 4-year-old granddaughter was right. The 28 years of separation were a loss that couldn't be recovered. But the love between them, the love that had never died despite distance and pain, that was eternal. Some stories don't have perfect endings. Some choices can't be undone. Some time can't be recovered. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But some love is strong enough to survive anything, even the mistakes we make in its name. Margaret looks at her son now, successful and confident and surrounded by people who adore him, and she knows the hardest truth of all: he didn't need her to become the man he was meant to be. Dorothy and James Thompson had given him everything she'd feared she couldn't provide, but he'd chosen to need her anyway. He'd chosen to make space in his complete life for the mother who'd given him away. He'd chosen forgiveness over anger, understanding over resentment, family over the easier path of staying strangers. That choice, his choice to love her despite everything, might be the most beautiful gift she's ever received. As she watches Marcus teach Maya to ride a bike in her backyard, patient and encouraging and completely present, Margaret finally understands what Dorothy Thompson had tried to teach her all those years ago. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up over and over again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Margaret had thought that giving Marcus away was the most loving thing she could do. She'd been wrong about that. But she'd been right about one thing. He deserved all the love in the world. He'd found it with Dorothy and James. He'd built it with Rachel and the girls. And now, somehow, miraculously, he was sharing it with her too. Some gifts come disguised as losses. Some endings are actually beginnings. And sometimes the family you think you've lost forever finds its way back to you when you need it most. Margaret Williams had spent 28 years believing she'd made an unforgivable choice. She'd learned instead that forgiveness, like love, is always possible, even when it seems too late. Especially when it seems too late. The baby she'd let go had grown up to save her husband's life. But more than that, he'd grown up to save hers too. Some circles take decades to close, but when they do, they're perfect.